Chapter 6. The Morvain Sentinel. Time, Day 16 post-lock. Afternoon. Location, aboard Lawkeeper 1, in transit. Aboard Lawkeeper 1 was stripped down, cavernous and cold. Ambassador Thorne sat in the forward compartment with the Gamma delegation, Councillor Rissa Aguslani, and her two personal guards, Sentinels Cygnus and Kestrel. The two Sentinels were imposing, fully enclosed in dull silver, segmented plate armor that hummed faintly with ambient energy. Thorne glanced at Rissa. She was a woman of impossible composure, her long neck and elegant posture earning her people the nickname Goosefolk among the Alpha Brain staff. She watched the data scrolling on Thorne's military tablet with intense focus, but her eyes, the color of twilight, betrayed no comprehension. Consular Rissa, the comms are secure for the next few hours of flight, Thorne began, trying to break the heavy silence. I only had time to meet representatives of the Guzalani and Castellane peoples. You spoke of the 11 nations. Could you perhaps illuminate the Accord's full membership? Knowledge is the only currency I can offer you now. The full Covenant Councillor Rissa leaned forward, her voice becoming a calm, structured lecture. The 11 is a necessity, a strategic alliance of disparate powers, built for the express purpose of holding the fantasy brain Gamma intact against the wild and the dead. The 7 core powers drive the alliance, controlling our military and energy output. She detailed the key members: the Barlugard mountain clans, brutish, powerful, and masterful miners, providing the raw, entropic-resistant minerals we need for defense. The Volpari Magisters, a race of shrewd, fox-like mages, specializing in defensive wards and temporal foresight. The Violaniga Alchemists, their expertise lies in the distillation of toxins and advanced healing tinctures, the closest analog we have to your pharmaceuticals. The Isengrim Cavaliers, the heavy shock cavalry of the Alliance, whose magic focuses on speed and kinetic mass. The Morvain Sentinels. They are the eyes and ears, the scouts and guardians. Swift, disciplined, and utterly silent. Since the event, Sentinel patrols have been running the Beta coasts in short incursions. In and out. We return with sketches, measurements, and hazard notes. Not a catalogue. Enough to stop calling everything unknown. The Castellane Druids, a race that survived the land-shattering cataclysm a century past. They are now a subterranean people, maintaining their powerful druidic lifestyle, propagating and sustaining vibrant flora deep below the surface, with complex geomancy. The Guzalani Goosefolk, my people, who provide the central diplomatic authority and strategic direction. The 4 remaining nations are minor participants, most serving as vassal states under one of the 7 larger powers. However, one is unique, the Scanics. Rissa continued. They are a small, isolationist clan of ratfolk who maintain their size and independence through self-imposed isolationism. They only joined the alliance recently, when the Lock swallowed their most trusted trade partner, forcing them to seek the Covenant's protection. Kestrel's interjection. The plane abruptly began to shudder, a deep, persistent vibration that forced Thorne to grip the armrests. They were hitting the dimensional static of the wild brain Beta transition hard. The air outside was turning a sickly, sulphurous yellow-red, and the internal lights flickered violently. Sentinel Kestrel, the armored guard who had been rigidly still, shifted his weight. He lifted a gauntlet to the ridge of his helmet, flipping a small, merely invisible clasp. With a faint mechanical hiss, the armored visor detached from the helmet and swung up, revealing the avian elf beneath. His face was an obsidian black mask of dense feathers that wrapped around a narrow, sharp-featured profile. A thin, prominent beak jotted slightly beneath 2 intensely intelligent eyes the color of cobalt. The feathers around his neck were a brilliant, iridescent azure, the vivid coloring of a blue jay. It's the residual turbulence of the Beta scar, Kestrel said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that was unexpectedly casual. He sounded like a professional pilot discussing weather. The Wyvern tracks we left yesterday are pulling the static energy back across the crossing point. Nothing to worry about, Ambassador. Thorn, the diplomat, stared at the sentient blue jay in plate armor, speaking perfect English, his face momentarily blank. Councillor Rissa smiled, recognizing the shock. The Morvain Sentinels are unparalleled flyers and strategists. They see angles in the air that no human could conceptualize. They are the eyes and ears, and they report only what is true. Sentinel Kestrel is observing your capacity for shock, Ambassador. My capacity for learning, Councillor Thorn managed, finding his voice. Just learning. Chapter 7. Mid-flight escort time. Day 16, post-lock afternoon location. Aboard Lawkeeper 1. In transit. The plane settled, the violent shuddering of the beta crossing subsiding into the smooth, high-altitude thrum of the Airbus engines. Residual yellow-red static outside gave way to a hazy, neutral grey. They were hours from the perimeter of the Americas Accord. Councillor Rissa produced a small, silver flask and a set of nesting cups, pouring a steaming amber liquid. Ambassador Thorn, this is Guslani herbal infusion, harvested from the sky mallows of the high peaks. It is an excellent counter to the temporal nausea your body is experiencing. Is your world's primary sustenance functional? Thorn accepted the cup, feeling the heat seep into his chilled hands. We run on synthetics and bad habits, Councillor. Our closest functional equivalent is probably a double espresso. It's potent, but lacks the serenity. He smiled, a moment of genuine, non-diplomatic relief. Rissa offered a cool, almost imperceptible smile in return. The tense silence had broken, replaced by the easy, tired conversation of two professionals from different universes sharing a simple moment above the chaos. Suddenly, Sentinel Kestrel, who had been rigidly still, snapped to full, rigid attention. His head rotated slowly, his hidden eyes scanning the hull. With a swift, silent is likely to replicate our path. In a single prayer, he lays in the darkness from the bottom. At the exact same instant, the primary tactical warning console in the cockpit flared bright red, and a strident electronic alarm howled through the cabin, cutting short the conversation. Warning! High-speed air contacts. A pilot's panicked voice screamed over the intercom. Multiple large bio-targets entering our envelope from the beta line. They're moving fast, erratic, a different signature than the wyverns. Kestrel's fellow sentinel, Cygnus, immediately mirrored his stance, drawing a long, glowing rapier from its scabbard. Kestrel spoke directly to Thorn, his voice a low, urgent command over the alarm. Ambassador, these are Bloom Reapers. They hunt by scent, not heat, and they are impervious to your kinetic rounds. Cygnus and I must engage immediately. We require access to the cargo ramp and one of your radios to talk to your pilots. Councillor Rissa stood, her composure utterly unshaken. They are the Morvain Sentinels, Ambassador. Allow them to perform their function. We are their principal charge. Thorn didn't hesitate. He grabbed the mic for the flight deck. Pilot, open the rear ramp and divert the Nat drones to patrol formation. Give the two Sentinels a dedicated comms channel on the cockpit loop. Now! Sentinel Kestrel, you are the operational commander for this engagement. Go! A moment later, a dedicated communication earpiece and mic was tossed back from the cockpit. Kestrel caught it with an armoured hand and handed the earpiece to Cygnus. He secured the mic near his visor's hinge. Pilot, Estrel's voice, now calm and professional, cut clearly through the intercom's static. Cygnus will take the starboard high. I take the port low. On my mark, we split and spoil their lead. Hard brake, then climb. We are exiting the airframe now. Kestrel and Cygnus moved to the rear of the plane, their armoured boots clanging on the deck as the heavy ramp began to cycle down, revealing a sheer drop and the hazy, turbulent air of the dimensional boundary. The drop in the hunt. The air blasted into the cabin, a thick, wet wind, smelling of ozone and raw organic energy. Kestrel didn't pause. He secured the mic near his visor's hinge and locked his cobalt gaze on the void. The Gloom Reapers were already visible. 5 distinct, segmented shapes, slicing through the hazy air at impossible speeds. They looked like massive, manta ray-like insects, their wings beating with a sickening wet sound, leaving trails of black vapor. "Mark!" Kestrel's voice was crisp and devoid of effort, cutting through the intercom static. "Brake hard. Split altitudes now." The Airbus yawed violently to port. Kestrel used the sudden shift in centrifugal force to launch himself backward. He pushed off the ramp, his dull silver segmented plate armor momentarily catching the cabin lights, before vanishing into the gloom. Sentinel Cygnus follow a half-second later, dropping into a tight, deliberate spin. Kestrel's armor, a thin layer of enchanted ceramic over high-tensile mesh, was built not just for defense, but for energy channeling. As he fell, he mentally drew on the ubiquitous ambient energy of the Ganabrain air, focusing it through the runs etched into his pauldrons. The energy stabilized him, slowing his initial descent, and allowing him to think in the 500-knot airstream. He drew his war pick, its head a dense, crystallized focus gem, designed to discharge ambient energy on impact. The closest Gloom Reaper, hideous and shadow-like, banked toward the fuselage. "Kestrel to Glatz leader, target acquisition. Targets are inbound in your 6, closing at 0.9 Mach. Pilot, maintain separation for 30 seconds. Gnats, hold formation behind the main airframe." Lieutenant Diaz, the Gnat drone operator, shouted into his boom mic. "Sir, a 5-degree bank at this speed is manageable for a drone. It won't distract a target that size." Doran leaned into the cockpit. "Do what he says, Lieutenant. He's commanding the air, not the metal. Do you hear me? Follow his order." Diaz hesitated and snapped. "Roger, Kestrel. Gnat leaders standing by for Firefly. We are banking 5 degrees on your mark." In the next second, Kestrel's voice was back. "Cygnus, engage high divert on Reaper 5. I need time to clear this vector. Gnats, Firefly, now." Diaz slammed the control stick. The Gnat drones barely registered the input, performing the useless 5-degree twitch. But the Gloom Reaper targeting Kestrel, a creature of pure hunting instinct, saw the two smaller objects move. It didn't analyze the movement. It merely registered the tiny change in momentum and scent relative to the massive, stationary airframe. The Reaper instantly veered toward the fleeting distraction. Kestrel didn't waste the opening. As the Reaper banked away from him, he fired a prolonged stream of focused ambient energy from his gauntlet. The invisible force struck the Reaper, pinning one of its wings and slamming it into the main fuselage of the Airbus with a deafening, metallic shriek. "Impact! Target 4 is crippled!" Captain Eva shouted, wincing at the violent shuddering of the plane. "Sentinels, that was too close." "Proximity is necessary, pilot," Kestrel replied coolly. "Cygnus, terminate Reaper 5. Humph and the rest." The Sentinel Cygnus, executing the high divert Kestrel had ordered, used the altitude gained to drop a massive, glowing net, a magical weave of captured ambient energy, onto the Reaper attempting to flank him. The Reaper thrashed, instantly entangled, its shadowy body reacting to the magical restraints with visible pain. Cygnus plummeted, rapier first, plunging the glowing blade directly into the Reaper's central nervous cluster. The remaining 3 creatures, sensing the immediate magical death of their kin, broke formation and fled back toward the wild brain, all contacts retreating. Threat neutralized. "Cygnus, return to hangar," Kestrel stated. Inside the cockpit, Captain Eva let out a ragged breath. "Threat neutralized, sir. Switching back to cruising altitude." Ambassador Thorne watched the cargo ramp cycle closed. The Sentinels were moving back into the main cabin, their silver armor now subtly stained with black residue. He felt a profound shift in his understanding. These were not guards. They were living weapons, controlled and deployed with chilling, ancient expertise. "Welcome back, Sentinels," Thorne said, his voice flat with respect. "That was extremely effective." Kestrel flipped his visor up, revealing the bright, alert cobalt eyes. His face was streaked with soot and shadow matter, but he looked completely composed. The Gloom Reapers are Beta's trash, Ambassador. A nuisance, nothing more. Kestrel said, pulling the borrowed comms mic free and handing it back to Diaz. They follow scent trails left by the wyverns. That was the last of the residual static. We will have a quiet journey from here to your perimeter. He nodded toward Councillor Rissa. If the ambassador is agreeable, Cygnus and I will rest and recharge our wards. We are perhaps halfway through the distance to the Accord's territory. We will resume duty when the sun rises over your world. Crosscurrent V. The Hidden Colony. Time, Day 16. Post-lock location. The Hidden Colony, Beta. The Flayer's wound. The moment the Ring of Worlds snapped into place, General Corvus, the system player, was almost destroyed. His sabotage had worked perfectly, preventing the Mage's catastrophic energy discharge. But the resulting backwash of uncontrolled multidimensional power had overloaded his core functions. The very magic that fueled his power, technological devolution, had turned inward, attempting to dismantle his own biomechanical systems. Corvus collapsed, his obsidian-plated body spasm, his sophisticated systems regressing to crude, useless metal. General Ilia the Swarmcaller had only moments to act. Her power, instinct domination, gave her a raw, intuitive map of the ring's overlapping energies. Ignoring the screams of the Nexus cohort, she grabbed the failing Corvus and executed a blind, desperate dimensional leap, pushing them both out of the hub Earth's core and into the chaos of the adjacent wild brain Beta. They materialized deep within Beta's unmapped turbulent jungle, landing amid a thick, steaming canopy. Corvus was barely functioning, his consciousness reduced to a flickering static field. The Megalian architects. The wild brain was ruled by colossal, primitive organisms, but it was also home to smaller, hyper-organized life. Ilia's mind quickly filtered the millions of frantic primal impulses until she found the perfect asset, a vast, isolated colony of Megalian ants. These were massive, ant-like insects, each individual roughly the size of a light aircraft, whose society was driven by absolute, unthinking biological coordination. Ilia's instinct domination settled over the colony like a blanket, overwriting their queen's commands with her own strategic will. She commanded them to build a silent, subterranean sanctuary, the Hidden Colony. Within days, the Megalians used their colossal mandibles to chew through bedrock, excavating a complex network of tunnels and deep, armored caves miles beneath the surface. This massive engineering project served two purposes. It created a fortress perfectly camouflaged beneath the wild brain's turbulent, chaotic surface, and it placed General Corvus directly into the Beta brain's deep psychic flow. The quiet consolidation Corvus was entombed in the deepest, most stable chamber, his damaged systems slowly drawing on the dense, ambient psychic energy of the primordial world. Ilia rarely left the subterranean base. Her psychic reach expanded outward, taking root in the minds of the surrounding megafauna. She wasn't controlling them, not yet, but was cataloguing their habits, their fears and their attack patterns, weaving a living perimeter around the hidden colony. Their aim was pure consolidation, regain Corvus's expertise, and build an army of controlled beasts large enough to credibly challenge the four mages of the Obsidian Circle. Their presence was a secret held only by the giant insects and the silent, pulsing brain of the injured general. They would wait. They would consolidate. They would not interfere with the skirmishes happening at the borders of the ring, nor would they send any signal to the mages in the center storm. Former generals knew that the moment the Obsidian Circle realized they had survived, their chances of success would vanish. For now, in the deepest dark beneath the wild, violent jungle, they were perfectly silent and perfectly invisible. Interlude. The grasp turns north time. Day 16 post-lock location. The Throne of Scraps. Beta. The Throne of Scraps. Kaldor Vane, the master of the Shadow Grasp, surveyed his council from his throne, a crude construction of welded alpha brain tank plating and ornate brass-studded gamma brain wood. Their stronghold, the Boneyard, was a fortress built into the cliffs, overlooking the wild brain beta overlap ocean, with gamma, a source of unending, dense raw materials. Kaldor was an Isengrim warlord, an ex-soldier whose disciplined military training had curdled into a ruthless, predatory ambition. His dark, scarred muzzle and piercing yellow eyes gave him an air of constant, barely contained ferocity. He wore tailored gamma leather over stolen alpha brain combat fatigues. So, the bar fight was a successful distraction, Kaldor asked, his voice low and sharp. A small, grey-furred Scannic rat man, named Vermin, the Grasp's chief intelligence broker, scurried forward. Perfect, Lord Vane. Flint, the Castellane barkeep, threw out the three drunks. The Alpha Brain colonel sent a couple of his soldiers to patrol the ridge, convinced it was mere petty banditry. The true agent slipped the Morvain sentinel and confirmed the internal chaos of the Accord. Kaldor nodded, tapping a long bone pipe on a sheaf of holographic Alpha Brain intelligence reports. The Americas Accord is our target. What have the true spies confirmed about the political fault lines? Berman's nose twitched, and he projected the Alpha Brain tactical map onto the floor. The map was fragmented by jagged new borders. The Accord is collapsing under its own weight, Berman chirped excitedly. The Texas secession was merely the first crack. The resource-rich province of Alberta, oil, gas, grain, has pulled back its forces, focusing only on a defense of its own perimeter. They are isolated, suffering from the broken relations that leave them open to infiltration or attack. Hugris has cut them off from unified military support. The generals on Vane's right stood Bruin, the Mountain, a towering figure of the Balagard faction. Her polished chiton armor was scarred from a dozen brains, and her posture was one of unmoving, coiled power. Across from her, Mortis Rex, the Lich, leaned on the table's edge, his skeletal presence emanating a field of necrotic silence. The air around him felt cold and electrically charged. The Accord is fixated on the rot in the Pacific. We will use the North's natural cloak to slip around their attention, Vane stated, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. The Northern Storm will mask our initial entry. Their satellite coverage is worthless in that maelstrom. We will skirt the storm, drop south through the frigid, desolate territories, and finally into Alberta. Bruin's massive hand pointed to the region around Edmonton. The goal remains the same: rapid, decisive acquisition. My Balagard shock troops are best for siege warfare and are already moving through the beta overlap zone. We secure the Edmonton refineries in under 18 hours. Mortis Rex raised a skeletal hand. Once the infrastructure is secured, my necrotic conversion process will begin, stabilizing the overlap zone and creating a permanent scalable anchor in the north. But securing resources is merely survival. To achieve political dominance, we must crush the will to resist. The Lich's finger traced the map further south. General Bruin, your forces must not stop at the refineries. Once fuel conversion is underway, the next wave of the Legion proceeds immediately to Calgary. It is the seat of their fragmented power. If we seize the political capital immediately after the economic engine, there will be no central command structure left to organize a meaningful counterattack. The jittery form of Vermin, a thing of wires and eyes, constantly shifted behind the Lich. My networks ensure the few observers in the region remain convinced the storm is merely escalating. By the time the Accord Command realizes this is an invasion, we will have crippled their economic and political centers. The call to arms. Kaldor Vane smiled, a wide, predatory gesture that stretched the Isengrim's muzzle. Vermin, you and your network will run full-spectrum counterintelligence. Make sure the Castellane at the FOB remain convinced we are mere bandits looking for stray gear. Generals Bruin and Mortis, begin the mobilization of your Legion and the Grasp's full air fleet. We are not robbing a bank this time. We are seizing a nation. Our target is the isolated province of Alberta, We make our claim in 72 hours. The generals nodded assent. The Shadow Grasp had ceased to be mere outlaws. They were now a rapidly advancing military power, aiming for the heart of Alpha Brain's resources. Chapter 8. The Whisper of Root and Rot. Time. Day 16 post-lock location. Forward Operating Base, FOB Delta Point. DEMA. The Delta Point FOB, Lieutenant Colonel Jensen's forward operating base. FOB Delta Point was less a military installation and more industrial disaster site. The prefabricated dome, pressurized against the thin, chilly air of the gamma-grain overlap, sat near a sheer cliff face. Below, the multidimensional ocean churned a thick, dark indigo, stained with streaks of viscous, oily black, the rot. The Airbus Lawkeeper 2 had been moved into a newly created maintenance tent. Its rear cargo bay was currently a chaotic mix of Alpha Brain engineering and Gamma Brain magic, manned by a surprisingly efficient multi-species team. The loudest worker was Sergeant Boren, a Baal god from the mountain clans. He was a towering, heavily muscled bear man, currently using a massive ambient energy-charged pneumatic hammer to drive reinforced steel pilings deep into the rocky ground. The Beluguard were not subtle, but their structural work was peerless. Colonel, that Alpha Brain steel is weak against the residual anthropic energy near the scar, Boren rumbled, his voice a deep bass that resonated through his work mask. It's holding. But we need more of the Volpari alloy rivets on the main dome, or it'll start to flake. Your welding torch is a pretty little toy, but it won't stop the rot from eating what it can reach. Working in sharp contrast to the massive Beluguard was Zeph, a serpentine alchemist attached to the rot eaters. He was an 8-foot ribbon of muscle, an immaculate presentation, his scales a clean porcelain white that caught the worklights like glazed ceramic. Where Boren looked built for breaking stone, Zeph looked built for being looked at, right down to the cherry blossom pink horns that curled back from his crown, and the matching accents picked out along his gear. Bolted to one shoulder was a heavy pauldron shaped like a cobra's head, metal fangs bared. The mouth hung open in a perpetual warning, and if you stared too long it became obvious. The darkness behind those fangs wasn't just shadow. A small glowing orb drifted near it, bobbing with impatient energy. "That's Pip," Zeph said without looking up, hands steady on a valve as he supervised the transfer of the deep root agent. "She bites." "I do more than bite," the orb snapped, voice tiny but oddly amplified, as if the cobra's throat doubled as a speaking tube. It flitted inside the open mouth for a heartbeat and emerged again, trailing a smear of dark paste on an implement it absolutely should not have been able to store anywhere. "The Castellane are correct, Colonel," Zeth continued, tone brisk and professional, despite the spectacle on his shoulder. "This agent requires extreme thermal and psychic stabilization, or it degrades before it ever reaches the water." He nodded toward the deployment chute. "Pip is lining the throat with binder now. It only has to hold for seconds, but those seconds matter." The orb dipped. Offended anyone might doubt it. "Without that lining," Zeph finished. The rot will consume Fjord's working before the deep root can take. The port and the outlaws. The core military team, Alpha Brain, remained within the secure dome, but a small community was already taking root outside. Gamma Brain's support personnel, cooks, logistics specialists, stable hands, and even a few Volpari magisters were making homes in the small, sheltered valley behind the FOB. They had little to return to in the turbulent Gamma Brain frontier, and the promise of stable, paid work was a potent draw. They called the settlement the port. Jensen was reviewing the deep root flow data with Fjord when a sudden, loud commotion, a mixture of shouting, crashing mugs, and angry, Castellane-accented roaring, erupted from the largest structure in the port, a newly designated communal mess hall known as the Deep End. Jensen sent his Alpha Brain communications specialist, Staff Sergeant Ava Chen, to investigate. She returned moments later, rubbing her ears. Sir, it's clear. 3 rough-looking Gamma locals were thrown out. Castellane barkeep handled it, Chen reported. They were drunk, loud, and demanding to know where our flying metal was kept and what the strange soldiers were doing. They were looking for trouble. Jensen frowned. Did they cause any serious damage? No, sir. Just broken crockery and pride. The barkeep, a massive Castellane named Flint, didn't even drop his pipe. He just shoved them out and is back to serving lukewarm broth. Chen paused, lowering her voice. He said they were known border rats, part of a group called the Shadow Grasp. He said they usually stick to robbing caravans, but they've gotten bolder since we set up shop. The Morvain report. As if on cue, a young Morvain sentinel, named Rook, a raven-like counterpart to Kestrel's Blue Jay, glided down from the communication spire. Rook wore light, silent matte black armor. Colonel, Rook chirped, landing silently beside Jensen. The 3 loud ones have retreated to the northern ridge. They are currently observing our perimeter. I confirm Sergeant Chen's assessment. Standard frontier opportunists, currently more interested in our equipment than in kinetic engagement. They pose no immediate threat to the primary mission. Trash has been taken out, but it is still sitting on the porch. Jensen gave a grim nod. Understood, Rook. We proceed with the trial run. Security levels remain at green, but I want 4 of my Alpha Brain personnel and 2 Balu guards stationed on that ridge as soon as the test flight is over. The porch is no place for trash. The trial run. The next morning was cold, clear, and perfectly still. Ideal conditions for the test flight. The modified Airbus, now painted a drab, matte grey, and affectionately dubbed the Deep Root Dispersal Vessel, DRDV, was ready. Muster Druid Fjord Hammerstone, wearing his simple woolens and carrying his staff, stood in the cargo bay next to the open deployment chute. Zeth watched the final flow rate of the Deep Root agent with a clinician's patience, while Pip, a bright orb of light, bobbed at the mouth of the Cobra Pauldron and darted in and out to check the chute lining one last time. Jensen stood in the cockpit, watching his pilot, Captain Rodriguez, finalize the flight plan. Remember the protocol, Captain. Low altitude, minimal thrust. Fjord needs the air to be undisturbed for the anchor runes to take hold. If the rot affects the airframe, you abort immediately. Roger that, Colonel. This isn't a landing. It's a surgical strike at 20 feet, Rodgers confirmed. The DRDV lifted off and flew a tense, silent 5-minute route over the dark, polluted ocean. When they reached the designated target, a thick pool of black, oily rot, Captain Rodriguez brought the plane down to a terrifyingly low altitude. In the cargo bay, Fjord raised his staff. He didn't shout, he simply willed the air. His Castellane magic pulsed, a soft, green light, as the Deep Root slurry was released through the chute Pip had prepared. The agent hit the water, and Fjord quickly etched a glowing, temporary rune into the air with his staff, holding the magical compound in place for the critical seconds it needed to activate. The rot's initial reaction was violent. A small plume of black vapor shot upward. But then, the Deep Root took hold. The toxic black surface, no larger than a city block, began to curdle and turn grey-white. It was consuming the rot's energy signature. The grey-white material quickly stabilized into a non-toxic spongy polymer that floated innocuously on the surface, already beginning to be scattered by the gamma brain currents. Jensen watched the satellite feed from a drone. In the exact spot where the rot had been, there was now a small, clearly defined patch of inert material. Captain Rodriguez gently pulled the DRDV up and away. Jensen clapped her on the shoulder. "Major success, Captain," Jensen said, his voice filled with an unexpected sense of relief. "That is the proof of concept. It works. Now we scale up." Down below, at the FOB, Master Druid Fjord Hammerstone returned to the command dome. He removed his damp coat, shook his massive head, and gave Jensen a simple, curt nod. "The rot is vulnerable. The Gamma Pact is valid. Now we begin the real work." Chapter 9. Necessary Convergence Time. Day 18 post-lock location. Vancouver, Accord Diplomatic Hub. The diplomatic hub of the Alpha Brain Accord was not a war room, but a cavernous oak-panelled chamber in Vancouver, designed for negotiations over confrontations. Ambassador Elias Thorne found the atmosphere frustratingly placid. The Accord leaders, focused on quarterly economic figures and political fracturing, treated the rot threat like a particularly volatile weather pattern. He stood opposite Ambassador Lena Vance, the face of the unified remnants of the Accord. Beside him, the Elven delegation, led by Venerable Lena, stood silently, radiating the quiet authority of the Gamma Brain. Ambassador Vance, Thorne stated, his expression firm. Our recent engagement confirms the rot is adapting. It has learned to respond to our word intervention, with crystalline biological resistance. Cannot hold the Delta Point indefinitely without sustainable reinforcement. We are not asking for an invasion force. We are asking for a long-term trade agreement to secure Gamma Brain's continued goodwill and expertise. Vance shifted in her chair, aware of the gravity of the Elven delegation's presence. We value the Gamma Brain's presence, Ambassador Thorne. It is your word mastery that holds the Pacific line. What is your price to maintain the forward operating base indefinitely and keep the rot contained to its current zone? Thorne stepped back, allowing the lawkeepers to present their requisition. The price is knowledge and logistics. The refugees, particularly the children, need education from this brain. The FOB must become a real staging post. We require Alpha Brain to supply 3 essential categories of personnel: engineers to assist in facility construction, scientists to study the rot at a deeper cellular level, and teachers to ensure our displaced citizens remain functional. Venerable Lena spoke, her voice clear and carrying. In exchange, the lawkeepers 1 and 3 will return immediately with the needed personnel and the necessary supply of medical and communications gear. Our smaller Gamma Brain ferry, the Harpy, is loaded with your cargo and will serve as our permanent ferry between the FOB and the mainland. Vance nodded, relieved that the ask was intellectual and logistical, not purely military. That is acceptable. Furthermore, to support your heavy cargo needs, we will formally assign you one of our C-17 Globemaster transport planes. It is currently being refitted with the word-dampening stealth systems you require, and will permanently join your fleet for heavy lifting and rot fighting. Consider it a down payment for the expertise you provide. Thorne felt a measure of relief. The Accord had secured the means to hold the line. The deal is struck, Ambassador. We thank you for recognizing the severity of the rot crisis. An hour later, the official Accord media network broadcast the news. Ambassador Vance stood before a row of international flags, making the joint announcement with Thorne and Lena by her side. The announcement was framed as a humanitarian and scientific triumph. The Accord and the Gamma Brain people had entered a historic exchange of technology and personnel to combat the growing ecological and metaphysical threat of the rot. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. The newly fractured nations of South America, who had recently withdrawn their military support, abruptly reversed course, petitioning for immediate readmittance to the Accord's protective umbrella. The draw of Gamma Brain expertise, particularly their advanced healing and word science, was too potent to ignore. Meanwhile, the fiercely independent Texan Republic held fast to its secession, their ego preventing outright capitulation. However, their governor made an open, highly publicized invitation for the Elven and Isengrim delegations to visit Austin to consider relations with a truly sovereign power. Finally, the isolated nation of Alberta, the subject of a diplomatic tug-of-war over its crucial resources, stood proudly alone. While their long-standing demand for full Accord military protection remained unsatisfied, the promise of incoming engineers and scientists, who were implicitly part of this deal, was enough to keep their borders open to this particular limited traffic. Their official statement was brief. Alberta remains sovereign, but welcomes the flow of necessary aid. The world had shifted. The Accord seemingly galvanized and the northern route secured. The protagonists believed the fight had returned to a manageable, if difficult, stalemate, at the delta point. Under the northern storm, the shadow grasp was already moving. They were less than 2 days away. Chapter 10. The Unmatched Fire Time. Day 19, post-lock midday location. Nevada, test range. The forward operating base, in the Nevada desert, buzzed with frantic, coordinated chaos. With the Accord Gamma agreement finalized, engineers and scientists poured in from every direction, joining the newly arrived Gamma personnel. The first order of business was deceptively simple. What exactly happened when two entire realities tried to kill each other? A firing range had been constructed from cargo containers, concrete barriers, and the burned-out carcass of an old APC. Target dummies stood in a row, one armored in Alpha-Brain composite plating, one wearing light Isengrim rune mail, and another encased in a full-plate harness etched with shimmering wards. Sentinel Kestrel stood at attention on the firing line, visor up, cobalt eyes assessing the field with quiet calculation. Opposite him, Ambassador Thorne, General Croft, and a cadre of Accord engineers watched from behind a reinforced blast shield. Dawn cleared his throat. All right, we need honest data. No predictions, no assumptions. Just what happens. General Croft folded his arms. What happens, he said grimly, is we figure out if we're all screwed equally, or if we just take turns. Kestrel did not react to the joke. His feathers shifted with the faint hum of ambient energy. An engineer approached the Isengrim armored dummy and pressed the seal on a high-velocity AP rifle. Theory says, the runes will trigger, she murmured. Your theory is correct, Kestrel replied, without looking at her. The wards are mass-attuned, Kestrel. They wait for a cannonball. A needle traveling at supersonic speed does not give them time to consider. The rifle cracked. The result was immediate and violent. The tiny, hyperdense round punched straight through the rune mail and out the back of the dummy, with barely a change in trajectory. General Croft blinked. The magic didn't even twitch. Kestrel stepped closer, tapping the broken plate with a gauntlet. Your projectile is too fast, too small. The runes require time to ignite the ward form. There was no conversation between the materials. A field that cannot recognize a threat, cannot respond to it. Thorne noticed the phrasing. A field? He asked. So you're saying magic behaves like physics? More like weather, Kestrel corrected. Unstable weather. Since the lock, our word currents and your electromagnetic signatures bleed across each other. Some places they resonate, some places they cancel. Some places, he tapped the ragged hole in the armor, they simply ignore one another. A few of the engineers exchanged glances. That made sense, disturbingly enough. Now came the reverse. Kestrel stepped back to the line, raised his gauntlet, and gathered a sphere of raw word energy until it pulsed like a trapped star. He aimed at the composite armor dummy. He released it. There was no explosion, no heat, no blast. Instead, the armor came apart at the seams. The plates delaminated, buckled, and peeled away from the dummy in great curling ribbons. The interior polymer stretched, sagged, and then disintegrated into powder. It didn't deflect it, Croft whispered. It came undone, Kestrel nodded. Your armor is engineered to withstand kinetic forces, but word seeks structure. It found the lattice of your composite and followed the lines of stress. When the field harmonics reached threshold, the bonds failed. Thorne exhaled slowly. So our tech beats your armor. Your magic beats our armor. And neither does so predictably, Kestrel added. The Convergence twisted the rules. Your world's physics still operate, but they are threaded through with ours. Weird leaks into matter. Im leaks into ley lines. The battlefield is not merely contested. It is unstable. An Isengrim Moormage stepped forward, raised his staff, and conjured a fire lance, a brilliant crackling jet of superheated plasma. He drove it against the tactical vehicle's reinforced viewport. The heat didn't merely scorch the armor. It softened, sagged, melted downward into a glowing, dripping mass. Croft stared, horrified. That glass is rated for anti-armor warheads. Against impact, the Warmage said calmly. Not directed elemental flow. One of the Accord scientists scribbled notes frantically. So we can't rely on anything behaving as expected. Correct, Kestrel said. Not until your tech learns to anticipate word, and our word learns to survive your physics. Thorn ran a hand through his hair. So for now? Everything's a coin toss. Kestrel considered that. No, not a coin toss. A storm. He turned his gaze toward the horizon. A storm, made of two worlds' laws, crashing into each other. Until the brains stabilize, or you find a way to anchor them. Every interaction is a negotiation between fields. Sometimes violent, sometimes trivial. Always unstable. The tone of the test range shifted. No one spoke for a long moment. The silence broke as a young communications officer sprinted onto the range, panting hard, hair matted to his forehead. General! Commander! He gasped. Emergency transmission from Northern Early Warning. It's not the rot, sir, it's a fleet. Thorn caught him by the shoulders. Slow down! What fleet? The officer swallowed hard. The defense systems misclassified the contacts as Stormclotter. The Convergence interference too much field bleed. We only got 2 missiles off before the targets crossed into Alberta's sovereign airspace. General Croft's face went ash-grey. Targets? Steam-powered airships, the officer said, voice trembling. Hundreds of them. Gamma-brain holes patched with Zeta scrap iron. They're flying over us right now, and Alberta won't let us fire again without a declaration of war. Kestrel snapped his visor down. Fawn felt his stomach drop. The Edmonton refineries, he breathed. They're coming for the fuel.